My parents funded my twin sister's entire college tuition and told me, she has potential, you don't. 4 years later, I delivered the commencement address at her school. Mom grabbed Dad's arm and whispered, Harold, what did we do? The moment I heard my name echo through that stadium, I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at my father, Harold Townsend, 6'2", broad shoulders, the kind of man who fills a room without trying. He was sitting front row center with a camera lens the size of a small telescope aimed directly at the graduate section. His wife, my mother, Carol, was beside him, holding a bouquet of white and pink roses so large it blocked the person seated next to her. Between them sat a folded blazer on an empty chair, not a spare seat, their spare seat, for coats. I know because I recognized the blazer. It was the navy one Dad wore to Victoria's junior piano recital, the one he'd driven 4 hours for, the one he'd ironed himself because, as he told my mother that morning, I was in the hallway, I heard every word. Victoria deserves to see me make an effort. That was 6 years ago. He had never driven 4 hours for me. But here he was anyway, in the front row of Whitmore University's commencement ceremony, camera raised, waiting for his daughter to cross the stage. He just had the wrong daughter in his viewfinder. The university president adjusted the microphone, and 3,000 people settled into that particular hush that only happens in stadiums when something important is about to be said. It is my great honor to introduce this year's valedictorian and our most recent recipient of the Whitfield National Scholarship. Dad zoomed in on the graduate section where Victoria was sitting in her cap and gown, scrolling her phone. Francis Townsend. His hand froze. I stood up. The gold sash caught the morning light first. Then the medallion, heavy, etched, the kind of thing you only get once in your life if you're one of 20 people in the entire country. The applause started somewhere in the middle section and spread like a wave until it hit the rafters. I walked to the podium in heels that clicked against the stage floor like a metronome counting down. My mother's bouquet slipped sideways. My father's camera dropped to his lap. And across the stage, my twin sister Victoria, the one with the full college fund, the Cancun spring break, the professional headshots, stared at me with her mouth open, slowly mouthing a single word. Francis, like she was seeing a ghost. I adjusted the microphone, let the applause settle, looked out at 3,000 faces, and then, very deliberately, at 2 of them in the front row. 4 years ago, I said, I was told I wasn't worth the investment. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. I kept going, but I should back up, because to understand what happened on that stage, you need to understand what happened in my father's study on a Tuesday evening in August, 4 years earlier, when I was 17 years old, sitting across from him in a leather chair that cost more than my first semester's rent, asking him to help pay for college. I need you to understand what it sounds like when your own father looks you dead in the eyes and tells you that you are not a good bet. I am a twin. That sounds like a simple fact. It is not. It is an entire psychological architecture, a constant, lifelong, involuntary comparison. From the moment Victoria and I entered the world 11 minutes apart, we were measured against each other the way you'd measure 2 nearly identical objects and try to determine which one was worth keeping. Victoria came first. She has reminded me of this approximately 400 times. We looked similar. Same dark hair, same brown eyes, same gap between our front teeth that our mother called charming on Victoria, and something we should look into fixing on me. Victoria was louder, more confident. She filled a room the way our father did, and I think he recognized something of himself in her before either of us could speak full sentences. I was quieter, I read more, I got the same grades, actually better grades from sophomore year onward, but I got them in a way that apparently didn't perform as well. Victoria got A's with commentary. She'd come home from school waving a test like a flag, announcing her score before she got her backpack off. I'd fold mine into a textbook and leave it there. I didn't realize until much later that visibility is its own skill, and that I hadn't bothered to learn it. My father, Harold, Hal to his friends, never to us, was a regional sales director for an industrial equipment company. He understood ROI the way some men understand scripture. Everything was an investment. A vacation was an investment in family morale. A suit was an investment in professional presence. His daughters, it would eventually become clear, were investments in his legacy. One of us, anyway. My mother, Carol, was softer, but not stronger. She was the kind of woman who witnessed things and felt terrible about them, and then went along with them anyway because making peace felt less costly than making waves. In the taxonomy of family dysfunction, she was an enabler who genuinely believed she was a peacekeeper. I don't think she's ever understood the difference. We were 17 when the college conversation happened. Victoria had already been accepted to Whitmore University, a private school 2 states over, known for its business program and its manicured quad, and its entirely unnecessary Division II lacrosse team. Tuition, room, and board. Roughly $65,000 a year. $260,000 over 4 years. Dad had been saving for it since we were in middle school. For her, specifically. I found out later he'd opened 2 separate 529 accounts when we were born. One labeled Victoria College Fund and one labeled Family Emergency. I was the family emergency. I didn't know this at 17. I found out at 23 after my aunt let it slip at a Thanksgiving I wasn't technically invited to, but attended anyway because I wanted to see my grandmother. And old people will tell you anything if you sit with them long enough, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The night of the conversation, I had been sitting at my desk researching universities for 3 weeks. I had a spreadsheet. 12 schools, sorted by acceptance rate, scholarship availability, program quality, and proximity to part-time employment opportunities. I had a highlights folder of financial aid packages. I had a personal statement draft. I knocked on the door of my father's study. He was in the leather chair, the expensive one, dark brown, the kind that sighs when you sit in it. He was reading something on his laptop and looked up with the expression of a man who has been interrupted. I sat down across from him. I told him I'd been accepted to 3 schools and waitlisted at a 4th. I showed him the spreadsheet. I walked him through the financial aid gaps, roughly $22,000 per year for my first choice, a state university with a strong economics program. I told him I had a plan for the rest: work, study, part-time jobs, maybe a small loan for the gap years. I asked if he'd be able to help. He looked at the spreadsheet for a long time. Then he closed my laptop. My laptop gently, the way you close a book you finished with. And he leaned back in his chair and he said very calmly, "Francis, be honest with me. Do you think you have what it takes?" I told him I had a 4.1 GPA. I told him I'd won 2 regional writing competitions. I told him I'd been elected secretary of the debate team. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they've already decided and are just waiting for you to finish talking. "Victoria has a presence," he said. "She walks into a room and people notice her. That's not something you can teach." He paused. "The world rewards that. I want her to have every opportunity to develop it." I waited. "There's no return on investment with you, Francis." His voice wasn't cruel. That was almost worse. He said it like a budget assessment, like he was explaining why a particular stock wasn't worth buying. "You're smart, but smart isn't enough. Victoria has it. You're going to have to figure out your own path." I sat there for 3 seconds. Then I said, "Okay," and I went back to my room. I did not cry that night. I want to be clear about that. I sat at my desk with my cracked laptop, a hand-me-down Toshiba that had a habit of overheating every 45 minutes, and I opened a new browser tab and I searched full scholarships for independent students. I had $2,300 in savings from 3 years of babysitting and a summer stint at the local grocery store. Tuition at my first choice school was approximately $100,000 over 4 years. The math was not kind. But at 11:47 that night, on page 3 of my search results, I found something. The Whitfield National Scholarship. Full tuition, living stipend, academic mentorship, 20 recipients selected nationwide. I bookmarked it. I did not tell anyone. The next 4 years were, in purely logistical terms, the hardest thing I have ever done. I enrolled at Grantham State University, my second choice, the one with the lowest gap in financial aid, and I worked 3 jobs to make up the difference. Waitress at a diner on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, library aide during the week, dormitory custodial staff on weekend mornings, which meant I was mopping floors at 6 a.m. while the rest of the building slept off their Friday nights. I slept 4 hours a night for most of freshman year. I ate instant ramen from a shelf I kept organized like a pantry, because having order over something, anything, made me feel less out of control. I bought textbooks from a Facebook group for used academic materials and highlighted other people's highlights and told myself that someone else's prior emphasis was just a head start. I did not go home for Thanksgiving sophomore year, couldn't afford the bus ticket, and truthfully couldn't afford the emotional cost either. I went home for Christmas. I want to tell you about that Christmas. I arrived at my parents' house on December 23rd, taking the overnight Greyhound because it was $32 cheaper than the morning bus. I walked in through the back door at 7 in the morning, they'd given me a key at least, and put my bag down in the hallway and went to look for my mother. She was in the kitchen making breakfast. She hugged me. She asked if I was eating enough. The hug lasted about 4 seconds, which I counted because I had been alone for a very long time and I was paying attention to it. My father was in his study. He did not come out until noon. We sat down to Christmas dinner that evening. My mother had set the table with the good china, the stuff she only brought out for special occasions. There were red candles in silver holders, a centerpiece of pine branches and dried oranges that she'd seen on Pinterest. 3 place settings. I stood in the doorway for a moment and counted. 3, not 4. 3. There was an empty space at the table where a 4th setting could have gone, but instead there was a decorative bowl of ornaments, perfectly arranged, as if the table had been styled for a magazine shoot, and there simply wasn't room for another person in the composition. I pulled a chair from the living room and carried it to the table and set my own place. Nobody commented. After dinner, while I was washing dishes, I heard my mother say to my father in the hallway, "I just don't know what to talk to her about. She's become so serious." My father said, that was the conversation. I took a photo of the table before I left. 3 place settings, decorative bowl, the whole composition. I saved it in a folder on my phone labeled Fuel. I looked at it exactly 3 times. Once when I almost withdrew from a winter semester calculus exam because I'd worked a double shift the night before and my hands were shaking too badly to hold a pencil properly. Once when I didn't get the summer research grant I'd applied for. Once on a February night junior year when it was snowing sideways outside my window and the heating unit in my single room made a clanking sound that kept me awake, and I sat there genuinely wondering if any of it was worth it. It was worth it. Anger is the cleanest fuel I know. Junior year, second semester. I was sitting in the 3rd row of Professor Elena Vasquez's macroeconomic theory seminar when I turned in an essay on inflation modeling in post-pandemic developing economies that I had written in one sitting between my Tuesday diner shift and my 8 a.m. Wednesday lecture. I'd been up since 4. I'd run out of coffee. I'd written the last 4 pages on the library's desktop computer because my laptop had finally given up entirely, fan whirring like a distress signal before the screen went black for the last last time. The following week, Professor Vasquez, Dr. Elena Vasquez, tenured economist, former consultant to the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, author of a graduate-level textbook I'd read twice, stopped me after class. She set the essay on her desk, A+ in red at the top. Underneath it, in her small, precise handwriting, "This is the finest undergraduate essay I have received in 22 years of teaching. Tell me about yourself," she said. I told her everything, not in the way I'm telling you, with clean narrative arc and emotional distance. I told her the way you tell someone things when you've been underwater for 2 years and they've just handed you air. The favoritism, the study. My father's voice, very calm, explaining the concept of return on investment to his 17-year-old daughter. The 3 jobs, the ramen shelf, the Christmas table with 3 place settings and a decorative bowl where I should have been. Dr. Vasquez listened without interrupting. She is the kind of person who listens the way most people eat, with complete attention, savoring. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Have you heard of the Whitfield Scholarship?" I had. "I serve on the selection committee," she said. "I have for 9 years. I've been waiting for a candidate like you." She pulled a printed application guide from a folder on her desk and handed it to me. "The deadline is in March. The application is extensive. I will write you the strongest recommendation letter of my career." She paused. "One more thing. The recipient delivers the commencement address. They can choose any of the Whitfield partner schools for the ceremony." She opened her laptop and turned it toward me. The list was alphabetical. I found it on the 4th line. Whitmore University, Victoria's School. I looked at Dr. Vasquez. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "March 14th deadline," she said. "Don't be late." I won't pretend the application was easy. It was 3 months of controlled obsession. 10 essays, each between 500 and 1,000 words. 3 interview rounds, the first by phone, the second by video panel, with 4 committee members, including a former Secretary of Education named Dr. James Carver, who asked me to explain my economic modeling methodology in terms a non-economist senator would understand. The 3rd interview was in person in New York City. I took an overnight bus because I couldn't afford the flight, 12 hours each way. I arrived at the Whitfield Foundation's Midtown office at 8:47 a.m. in a blazer I'd found at Goodwill, pressed the night before with an iron I borrowed from the RA 2 floors down. The waiting room was the specific kind of intimidating that institutions use deliberately. Marble floors, framed portraits of previous scholars, a side table with sparkling water in glass bottles, which I did not touch because my hands were shaking and I did not trust myself with anything breakable. The other candidates were extraordinary. I know because I spoke to 4 of them. A pre-med student from Johns Hopkins who'd built a free clinic in rural Alabama during her gap year. A computer science major who'd developed an accessibility tool used by 60,000 people. A kid from a reservation in New Mexico who was the first person in 3 generations of his family to attend university. I almost left. I mean that literally. I stood up at one point, picked up my bag, and took 4 steps toward the elevator before I stopped. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. I thought about the leather chair. I thought about, there's no return on investment with you. I turned around and sat back down. The interview lasted 47 minutes. Dr. Carver, who had silver hair and the unhurried manner of someone who has never once been rushed, asked me at the end, "What do you want people to take from your story?" I told him I wanted them to understand that being underestimated is survivable, that it can be metabolized into something useful, that a person can be told they are not worth investing in and spend 4 years proving, quietly, to no audience whatsoever, that the assessment was wrong. Not to get revenge, I said, just to know. He wrote something on his notepad. I took the overnight bus back. The email arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday in April. I was opening the coffee shop where I'd just started a 4th, smaller job, 3 morning shifts a week, 5 to 9 before my first class. I was in the back room, still in my coat, fumbling with the industrial coffee machine when my phone buzzed. "Congratulations. It is our great honor to inform you that you have been selected as a Whitfield National Scholar." I read it twice, 3 times. I walked out through the back door into the alley behind the coffee shop, sat down on the curb in my coat, and sobbed. Not quiet crying. Real, ugly, gasping crying. The kind that surprises you because you didn't know it was in there. I cried for the Christmas table, for the 3 place settings, for the returned birthday cards, for every morning shift and every ramen dinner and every 4-hour night and every time I'd opened my phone and looked at that photo and reminded myself why I was still going. I cried for 17-year-old me in the leather chair, saying okay in a steady voice and walking back to her room alone. My manager came out to check on me. "Are you okay?" I wiped my face with my coat sleeve. "I just won a scholarship." She didn't know what scholarship, but she brought me a coffee, the good kind she only made for herself, and she sat on the curb with me for 10 minutes while I got myself back together. That was the kindest thing anyone did for me that year. The transfer process took 6 weeks. I told no one in my family. I understand that sounds dramatic. It was a decision I made deliberately, with clear reasoning. If I told them, one of 3 things would happen. My father would say something dismissive, and I would have to manage my reaction to it. My mother would tell Victoria, and Victoria would feel invaded, and there would be a family conversation I'd have to participate in. Or, worst case, someone would try to make it about them, and I would lose the one clean, uncontaminated victory I had ever had. So I transferred, quietly, and I arrived at Whitmore University on a Tuesday in September, and I found my new dormitory, and I unpacked my single single bag, and I sat on my new bed and I thought, I'm here. I actually did it. 3 weeks later, Victoria spotted me in the library. She was with 2 friends, all of them carrying iced coffees from the campus cafe, navigating the third-floor reference section with the easy confidence of someone who has never felt like a trespasser anywhere. I was at a corner table with my new laptop. The Whitfield stipend had taken care of that, and 3 library books and a half-eaten granola bar. She saw me from 20 feet away, stopped walking. Her iced latte drooped in her hand. Francis, hey, how are you here? Scholarship. The word landed between us like a pin pulled from something. Her friends looked at me with undisguised curiosity. Victoria looked at me with something more complicated. Surprise, and under the surprise, something I can only describe as calculation. The rapid reprocessing of a situation she hadn't been briefed on. What scholarship? The Whitfield. She knew what it was. I could see her knowing. She called our parents from the parking lot. I know because my father called me the following morning. The first time he'd called me in 3 years. 3 years. His name on my screen was such a shock that I sat with my thumb over the answer button for 4 full rings before I picked up. You transferred without telling us. Yes. Why? I thought about it. I didn't think you'd care. Silence. A long one. We're coming to graduation, he said finally. For Victoria. I know, I said. I'll see you there. I hung up. He didn't call back. In the weeks between that phone call and graduation, Dr. Vasquez, who had taken a position at Whitmore the previous year, which was a coincidence I will accept as the universe having a sense of narrative, helped me prepare my commencement address. We went through 6 drafts. The first was too angry. Not obviously. It was controlled, measured, the kind of anger that wears formal clothes. But Dr. Vasquez read it and said, "You're writing toward them. Don't. Write toward everyone who's ever sat in a waiting room in a thrift store blazer wondering if they should leave." The second was too humble. "You earned the podium," she said. "Stand on it." The 6th draft was right. I knew it the first time I read it aloud without stopping. It wasn't about my parents. It wasn't about Victoria. It was about what it feels like to be told you are not worth the investment, and what happens when you take that assessment and use it like the world's most efficient fuel source. I rehearsed it in front of a mirror 17 times. I bought new heels, low block, stable, practical, from the campus secondhand shop for $8. Graduation morning came in like a gift, genuinely. It was the kind of late May morning that makes you forget winter exists. Perfect blue sky, low humidity, the air carrying that mix of cut grass and sun-warmed stone that I will probably spend the rest of my life trying to find again. The stadium filled with 3,000 people. Families climbed the bleacher stairs with balloons and folded programs, and that particular expression of people who have been given permission to feel proud. I was in the graduate staging area when I spotted my parents. Front row center, the university reserving the best seats in the house for early arrivals. And of course they'd arrived early, for Victoria. My father was setting up the camera, a Canon with a telephoto lens, the kind serious hobbyists use. My mother had the roses, white and pink, a bouquet so large it was almost a costume. They were both dressed formally, my father in his navy blazer, my mother in a pale green dress I recognized from Victoria's high school graduation 4 years ago. Between them, the empty chair, the folded blazer. I looked at that chair for a long time from across the stadium, then I looked away. I had a speech to give. The graduate procession took 20 minutes. We entered to a processional arrangement that one of the music faculty had composed specifically for commencement, and the sound of 3,000 people standing up as we walked was something I felt in my sternum. Victoria and I were separated by 3 rows, our last names close enough in the alphabet for it to be almost intentional, the universe setting up its own staging. I saw her clock me as I took my place. She gave a small, sideways smile. Not unkind, exactly. Complicated. We are twins. We have 23 years of complicated between us. I smiled back. I meant it. The ceremony opened with remarks from the university president, Dr. Louise Keller, a compact woman in academic robes who had the precise diction of someone who knows they're being quoted. Acknowledgements, a land statement, thank yous to the faculty, the facilities team, the dining staff. Then she moved to her notes. "It is my great honor to introduce this year's valedictorian and Whitmore's most recent recipient of the Whitfield National Scholarship, one of only 20 awarded nationwide, recognizing exceptional academic achievement, and the kind of determination that doesn't photograph well but changes lives." I saw my father adjust the zoom on his camera, focused on Victoria, Francis Townsend. His hand froze. I stood up. The Whitfield medallion caught the sun first, the gold sash, the heels on the stage, $8 perfect, every step measured, 3,000 people. My mother's bouquet slipped sideways. My father's camera came down to his lap. Victoria's jaw dropped and she said my name without any sound. I walked to the podium. I adjusted the microphone to my height. I placed my cards in order, or not that I needed them. I had rehearsed this 17 times. I knew it the way you know your own address. I let the applause settle. I looked at 3,000 faces. Then I looked at 2 of them, and I leaned in. 4 years ago, I was told I wasn't worth the investment. The silence in that stadium was a held breath. I was told that success requires a certain presence, a quality that can't be taught, that some people are simply born with, and that I, by some misfortune of personality, did not possess. I paused. I was 17 years old. I was sitting across from someone I loved and respected, and I believed him. My mother's hand was pressed flat against her mouth, so I decided to find out if he was right. I talked about the 3 jobs, the ramen shelf. The audience laughed softly at that, the specific recognition of people who've been there. there. The 6 a.m. custodial shifts, the overnight bus to New York, the thrift store blazer, the 47-minute interview. I talked about the waiting room. I almost left, I said. I got up, I picked up my bag, I walked 4 steps toward the elevator, and then I thought about every person who'd ever told someone they weren't worth the effort, and I turned around, and I sat back down. Applause. I am not telling you this story to position myself as exceptional. I am telling it because I know that somewhere in this stadium, maybe in the graduate section, maybe in the bleachers, there is someone who has been told the same thing by a teacher, a parent, a boss, a voice inside their own head. You don't have what it takes. And I want that person to hear clearly from this podium. The people who underestimate you are telling you something about their own limited imagination. They are not telling you the truth. The applause started in the middle section and rolled forward. I chose to deliver this address at Whitmore University specifically, I said when the sound settled, because this is the school my family invested in. These are the halls they paid for. This is the institution they believed in, just not for me. I looked at my father. They were right that this campus was worth it. Pause. They were wrong about who would thrive here. 3,000 people came to their feet. The sound was extraordinary. It wasn't the polite applause of ceremony. It was the genuine, full-throated response of people who have just heard something true said out loud. I stood at the podium and let it wash over me, not performing gratitude, just receiving it. My parents did not stand. They sat very still, very pale, side by side in the front row with the empty chair between them and the navy blazer folded on its seat. My mother's roses had slipped all the way to her lap. My father's camera hung from his hand, pointing at the ground. I saw my mother lean toward him, her mouth close to his ear. I couldn't hear what she said, but I watched his face when she said it. The way something in his expression shifted, collapsed inward, like a structure losing its load-bearing wall. Later, I found out what she said. Victoria told me, 3 weeks after graduation, when we had the first honest conversation we'd ever had, sitting in a parking lot outside a coffee shop, both of us in normal clothes, no ceremony, no audience. She told me she heard it clearly because she was close enough, crossing the stage to receive her diploma when the words passed between them. Harold, what did we do? Not, what have we done? The broader, more philosophical weight of that. What did we do? Past tense, specific, irreversible. My father didn't answer her. The reception after the ceremony was held on the East Lawn. I was surrounded for most of it. Faculty, other graduates, families of people I'd become close to over 2 years at Whitmore. Dr. Vasquez found me within the first 5 minutes, looking genuinely moved, which for a woman of her caliber was a significant tell. She shook my hand with both of hers and said, I told you. 2 members of the Whitfield Foundation Board introduced themselves and said things about the speech that I accepted graciously and stored away to look at later, in private, when I had room for them. At some point, I don't know exactly when, because I was in the middle of a conversation with another graduate's mother, a woman from Ohio who had cried during my speech and wanted to tell me about her son who'd struggled. I noticed my parents. They were standing at the edge of the reception area, not in the thick of the crowd, not near the food tables or the flower arrangements or the commemorative photo station. On the edge, together, the way people stand when they're not sure they're allowed to be somewhere. My father was holding the camera at his side. My mother had the roses. She'd brought them out from the ceremony, still wrapped, never presented. They were watching me. I finished my conversation, thanked the woman from Ohio, and walked over. We stood in a triangle for a moment, the 3 of us, in the morning sun on the east lawn of Whitmore University, and nobody said anything. Then my father said, the speech was good. Thank you. I didn't know, he said, about the Whitfield, about the jobs. You didn't ask. He absorbed that. No, I didn't. My mother held out the roses. I looked at them for a moment. I took them, not because they fixed anything. They didn't. You don't repair 4 years of absence with a bouquet of grocery store flowers. You don't undo a conversation in a leather chair with the speech was good. Damage at the root doesn't heal overnight, or maybe ever. But I took them because I am not performing coldness either. I'm not interested in a permanent posture of refusal. What I wanted, what I had spent 4 years working toward, was not revenge. It wasn't their suffering. It was the truth, said out loud to 3,000 people who deserved to hear it. That was already done. I have a dinner with the department chair tonight, I said, but if you want to get coffee before you drive back, I can do 4 o'clock. My mother nodded quickly, too quickly, the way people agree to terms when they're grateful just to be offered them at all. My father said, 4 o'clock. I nodded. I walked back toward the reception.